Time for us to turn our attention to the Champions League semi-finals. I've been saying this now for a couple of days, but this is some of the best sport you're ever going to watch. So make sure you're in front of your TV tonight for Real Madrid against Manchester City. Not just for the subplots, but for the quality of football. Sam Lee of The Athletic is with us. Sam, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Many ghosts of Champions League semi-finals for Pep Guardiola. How has his general mood been this week? Is he King Lear raving on the heat, or is he actually nice and calm and methodical and his normal self? What is it?
Yeah, no, nice and calm. I mean, he has been, particularly since the international break, when you come back from that and it's Liverpool twice and Atletico Madrid twice, and you think it would be easy to be nervous and tetchy and whatever. He was on great form before those games. Yesterday, in terms of the press conference, he's obviously got that history with the Spanish press. And after the way the Atletico Madrid press conferences went, when they kind of, I would say, misinterpreted his comments on Atletico Madrid's style, he didn't want to get into any of that at all. So by the time the Spanish questions were asked at the end, he's like, I have no idea about that, or I'm not talking about that, and that was it, move on. So he was a bit tetchy in that sense, but I think overall, in fact, I heard from somebody yesterday who just said he's in a great place at the minute. He's loving life, would you believe?
We never quite know with Pep what's going to happen, considering he walked away from Barcelona when it looked like there were a number more years that he could have stayed there to hoover up Champions League titles with the best player in the world and some of the the best style of play. So we never quite know how long or if a clock is ticking about his tenure at Manchester City, but it appears as if perhaps he's here for a longer stay than maybe we anticipated when he arrived.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess he's here already longer than we thought. That was 6 years ago, and he's surely going to do at least another season. If he signed another contract, I wouldn't be too surprised. What you say there about Barca, I suppose it goes to show that it's not so much about, not always about the players at your disposal, but just kind of, job satisfaction, but just how nice the day-to-day job is. And at Barca, he was fighting loads of battles, not necessarily with Mourinho and Madrid, but like with his own kind of board, within Barca, there was so much politics that he kind of stood up and fronted, and in the end that wore him down. Whereas at City, and I kind of wrote this in my article before this game, and at Bayern Munich as well. At Bayern Munich, he had people above his head. He had Franz Beckenbauer, who was an honorary president, but he had Rummenigge, who was the president. He had Sammer, who was the sporting director, just constantly talking to the media, whether it was good, bad, constructive, whatever. And you just think, at City, he's got none of that. He's got none of the battles with the Spanish press, because they all went home years ago because they got bored of him winning and thought there's no story here. He's got nobody at City going above his head and talking to the press and putting pressure on him. Everything's geared towards making his life easy, and as easy as it possibly can be to manage this football team. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, there might have to be a bit of a shake-up in terms of the squad, because it's been largely the same group of players for so long. But yeah, he's in a great place, and it's for reasons like that, really.
So when Pep Guardiola starts as Manchester City manager, the press room at the Etihad is full of Spanish hacks, and nowadays it just isn't. And
yeah, there was a lot. And not all, and not all of them were, the kind of stereotypical Spanish journalists, El Chiringuito out for controversy. Not all of them at all. But I think even like some of the editors back in Spain were just like, okay, well, there's no story here anymore. They're just winning. But there was definitely a sense of glee in the first season or so when they weren't doing so well. And yeah, after a couple of years, that obviously dried up. Sadly, because they're a great group of lads, but there was enough to play a full game of five-a-side each. We used to go down and play during the days with like 9 or 10 Spanish lads, but now there's just like 1 or 2. So yeah, that kind of tells you the climate of what they want from Pep Guardiola in Spain versus the reality of how it's actually been.
Does Pep Guardiola make a mental note of that? Does he still remember those days where there might have been a few naysayers from Spain in the press room, and does he carry that with him into a week like this?
It wouldn't even have to be, like I say before with the Atletico Madrid press conferences, it wouldn't have to be examples from 3-4 years ago. But obviously he would. He'd remember that from his time at Barca. He'd even remember it from his time at Bayern, because when they played Real Madrid that year, and obviously Madrid won heavily, there was a lot of glee, again, in the Spanish media about how it panned out. So he'd remember that. But yeah, with the Atletico Madrid thing, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but he talked about how Madrid played 2 banks of 5, and he said, basically, what he was trying to say was that was and always will be hard to defend against. But he was like, even from the prehistoric times, now and in the future, that will be difficult to defend against. But a few in Madrid kind of picked up on the prehistoric bit and said that was a criticism. And then every press conference since, they were like, well, you said this about Diego Simeone, but you did this tonight. And he's like, well, I didn't say this. And then the next question would be like, but you said this. And he's like, well, I didn't. And it was just, you could see when the Madrid press came around this time and one asked him about styles of play, and Xavi said this and Ancelotti says this, what do you think? He's like, I'm just not getting into it. Because he just knows the way it's going down that same route of you criticise Simeone and whatever. He actually said, don't come looking for me in your styles, your battle of styles. This is nothing to do with me. This is something you've kind of constructed.
And I think maybe people kind of didn't quite appreciate, despite the contrasting styles, the huge degree of respect between Guardiola and Simeone, that was probably blown up to be something that it really bigger than it really was for the last round. And there could be a temptation to do something similar this time, could there? Like, despite the fact that Pep has said in the past that Ancelotti brought him into training sessions in AC Milan and has always had a really great respect for him.
I think there's probably more respect between Ancelotti and Pep. Because the funny thing was, Pep was going out of his way to say, look, I didn't actually say this about Simeone. Simeone did have a bit of a nibble about it. But I think deep down, they probably don't like each other, actually.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's the case. But with Pep and Ancelotti, yeah, for sure. They were always very close when Ancelotti was in England as well. It's funny, actually, the last time they played, it was Everton. And I remember Ancelotti saying, look, we tried to maybe go a bit more physical and a bit more direct, but City can do that as well. And then obviously you can't really try and outgun them because they're so good at that. So obviously it's a different kettle of fish tonight with Real Madrid. But yeah, for sure, there'll be much more respect between those two than with Simeone, even though obviously in public you'll always get that anyway.
What was your take on how the Manchester City players dealt with the disrespect from the Atletico players? Because it seemed to me, like it became a bit of a street brawl, obviously, and at the end of both legs, really, in the last round. But Manchester City, the players seemed to brush it off in an okay way. I'm not sure, maybe I'm just reacting to the fact that they won the game in the end and they had the last laugh, literally. But it felt that they did okay and when faced with that sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, arguably, City were better at those dark arts. You can look at it in a positive light or a negative, but they were, well, you could say worse in terms of the time wasting and exaggerating injuries. Obviously, Foden rolling back on the pitch. They did everything that Atletico Madrid do, and Atletico Madrid are normally criticised for. But in terms of handling it better, what I would say with that was when it kicked off at the end. Atletico could have had 2 red cards. They completely rose to the bait. They lost their heads with it. These are supposed to be the masters of it. You'd think what they would do is wind teams up, and then when it kicks off, you can't stand back and watch them implode. But it was funny because it was Atletico who imploded. And City, they only had one booking in that melee at the end, and that was Nathan Ake just kind of being the closest one to Foden and just grabbing Savic and pushing him off him. Like, probably was a yellow card, but it was nothing more than that, whereas obviously Savic could have been sent off for a headbutt. I suppose the only thing that City failed at in terms of the dark arts there was Sterling should have gone down and drew everyone's attention to the headbutt. But they were experts at it. They really were. And again, you can like it or not. Depends on your view.
I made that exact point in the immediate aftermath of the game, Sam, and the City fans at the time hammered me, but now I suspect they're like, well, actually, we should be proud of that, because that's the whole point about maturing in European competition. You're going to come up against Atletico one time, and then the next time you're going to come up against Real Madrid. So they've learned how to deal with Atletico. They haven't yet reached the point where they can get through these 2-legged semi-finals to see the final. What do they need to do? What do they need not to do when it comes to the 2 legs against Real Madrid? How much is Pep going to just let the team be the team tonight and not make any changes, not fall into the trap of the Bayern Munich listening to the players? What's he going to do tonight, do you think?
Well, that's a funny thing, because the idea of him listening to anybody else, well, apart from like his assistants now, regarding team selection, is just completely mad. That's another thing of how he's changed. Like, there was even a bit in one of those Marty Perronel books about his game against Atletico Madrid in 2016. He was like, if we do this, the fans would like it. And you just think, can you imagine him thinking, oh yeah, well, City fans would like this or the players would like this? There's just no chance. In terms of him making changes, you never know. So last year, on their run to the final, it was obviously different because there was no fans because of COVID. But he kept the same solid team, basically. And it was either Rodri or Fernandinho or Zinchenko or Cancelo. But everyone else was the same. And everyone thought, OK, no more changes, no more tinkering. And then obviously made changes for the final. In terms of what they're going to have to do tonight, they're just going to have to just play their game. They don't have to try and rush for anything. They can see how it pans out. I think removing away goals has meant it's always more likely to go to the second game. I suppose we saw that with Madrid and Chelsea in the last one. So, yeah, the big difference between this year and last year when they got to the final is they're going to the Bernabeu. The crowd is, the crowd can really change things. And as we saw with Madrid, 3-0 down against Chelsea and really on the ropes, they created that goal out of nothing. And I know a big thing for Guardiola during his time at City, but I also think during his time at Bayern as well, is how the team respond to those setbacks. If you concede a penalty or you have somebody sent off or you concede a goal, don't, lose your heads and then be in danger of conceding another one straight away. I actually asked Bernardo Silva about that before the Atletico Madrid game, and he said he thinks they're much better at that. I asked Guardiola as well, and he was like, yeah, we're better, but it doesn't mean we're going to go and win. Fine. But, so they're better equipped at dealing with that. But I think that's what they're going to have to watch out for. It's the fact that they can be up in the game. They can be bossing it. They can be having more possession, more chances. And then Madrid just going down the other end and score one goal. And it's how they react to that. So that is going to be the key to the whole tie, I think, over both games.
There's a fair degree of transfer talk around Manchester City on the back page this morning, as well as match preview. That's around Declan Rice at the moment. It's being compared a little bit to the Harry Kane situation, where Manchester City may be dissuaded as a result of the price tag that will be put on Rice's head by West Ham United. But I guess the question is, will West Ham United dig their heels in as much as Tottenham Hotspur did last summer in order to keep their player?
Yeah, well, I don't think City are going to go for Rice.
Right.
I think the idea that they're not sure now about whether, there'd be a saga or the price tag, these are conversations that City would have had ages ago. Normally at this time of year, they're like, okay, well, these are the guys we want. You're going to come, right? And then they go and negotiate with the club. They would have a much better idea of it. They would have known whether they were going to be able to sign Rice or whether they thought it would be worth a saga or not, or worth West Ham digging in or not. Like a couple of months ago, the problem they had with Kane was giving them the assurances that he had this agreement with Daniel Levy and they'd be able to get it done. And then as the summer went on, they just realised that this agreement was worth nothing, basically. And the reason that they signed Grealish and not Kane is not because they had the money for one and not the other. It's because Grealish had a legally binding release clause in his contract and Kane didn't. And that was the difference. So if they were thinking, oh, we'd love Declan Rice, but it's going to be too difficult, they would have made their minds upon that months ago, I'm sure. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you who they're going to go for instead. But whoever it is, I'm sure they're pretty far down the line with it. But at the same time, a lot of things have been on hold until they get Haaland sorted out, and that seems to be reaching the end game now. So I guess we might start finding out about midfielders and other things soon once they get Haaland sorted. And I think they're really pushing for that now.
So Haaland is effectively not a done deal, but nearly 9/10 there. Does that mean Gabriel Jesus automatically goes? Because he's been linked with Arsenal in the last few days. I wonder, is that just 2 and 2 equaling 4, or is that 2 and 2 equaling 22?
No, I mean, they're kind of linked, but I suppose the main thing with Jesus is his contract runs out next summer. So City fans have always had this debate of, is he good enough, is he worth keeping around? And then a couple of years ago you realise, okay, he's not going to be the next Aguero. But if you appreciate him for what he is as a good squad player, then you won't really be let down. But the thing with that debate is it was always City fans talking from the point of view of, well, we're the ones in power in the sense that he is going to be here, so we'll decide whether, hypothetically, he's good enough to be. But now he's got a year left on his contract, and now he's thinking, well, I'd like to play more, and why would I sign up for another 4 or 5 years of being in and out of the team? And he's out of the Brazil squad as well with the World Cup coming up. So it's not necessarily related to Haaland, especially because he's been playing more on the wing anyway. And I think it'd be a loss to City in that sense because they might lose a bit of variety out wide. But no, it's not any turn. he is thinking, okay, I've got an opportunity to go and play here. And it seems that Arsenal, their higher-ups, have had a good relationship because, Edu's Brazilian. They've got those links from previous contracts and stuff with Jesus' people. I think they've been talking for a while. And, yeah, from his point of view, he's just looking at it now thinking, where do I want to be? Well, how regularly do I want to be playing football in the next few years? And it looks like that's going to be somewhere else.
He's still only 25. Like, there's a possibility that he peaks in the next couple of years and becomes somebody who is much better than he is at the moment. I've one last question for you, and it's kind of a question about Grealish. And so, as a Villa fan, I've seen Grealish play a lot and still think that he's going to be a very effective player for Manchester City in the coming seasons. Why is it that so many players take a good long time to bed into the Manchester City situation? And is there hope for Grealish's long-term future in the form of Cancelo and Riyad Mahrez and a few others who took time to peak, even Bernardo Silva?
Everyone, yeah. I suppose even like people like Sterling and De Bruyne who already at City, they didn't struggle in their first season by any means, but they're obviously better after getting to grips with it. I mean, I can't put my finger on why. It's actually a perfect Athletic article, isn't it, explaining why it takes so long, and it's probably something I'll look into now, especially with the summer approaching. I know with Cancelo, because he'd actually, funnily enough and ironically enough, he'd always played left back for his previous teams in Italy, I think in Valencia as well, but didn't like it. I think he actually fell out with somebody at Lazio maybe about playing left back. He didn't like it. He was always used to just playing down the right-hand side. I remember speaking to people when he signed who'd worked with him, and they were like, oh, yeah, we've seen his crossing ability. He'll be putting in loads of great balls into the box. And even the ones who thought he would thrive, because some thought he might struggle because of his temperament, they thought it'd be more of a classic right-back. And obviously he's been this kind of inverted left quarterback, really. He wanted to go after about 9 months just because the tactical demands were just so different to what he was used to. Obviously with Grealish, I suppose it is different as well. You've got less space to run into. You're not in as many kind of one-on-one foot battles. You're touching the ball a lot less. You're not the main man. You're not the one they all look to. So some games, City just go entirely down the right-hand side. So Grealish will be looking over and thinking, I'm not getting the ball here. I know there's been a load of games where Mahrez has been stretching the play on the right, but it's all been down the left. So it's those things you need to adapt to, really. But like you say, you reeled off those players there. I also remember Leroy Sané had a slow start and then obviously burst into life. Bernardo Silva had a bit of a patchy first season. Cancelo, like you mentioned. Rodri. Basically everybody. The vast majority of City signings have needed a year to bed in. I think it's mainly because of just the different style of play, the different demands, all the things you need to bear in mind. Like when you're here, you need to be there. He needs to be there. And when he's there, you need to be there. All these kind of things. And it's a very different game to what he's playing at Villa. But also, I think that also works both ways. I think we probably need to appreciate that he's not going to be the same player because he's not being asked to do the same things. Certainly, you would like a couple more goals to show for it, and the price tag's always going to demand that. But ultimately, it's not the price tag, I think, especially when it's City, that demands what's going to be the level of performance. It's going to be the adjustment time, and whether you cost 10 million or 100 million, it's probably going to take you a year or a season to understand what Guardiola wants, and then from then on, you can really hit the ground running. And that's why I've not really got into the Grealish debate too much, other than to say we can have this debate in a year's time. If it's still not working in a year's time, then we can talk about it. But for now, we've seen it all before in terms of players needing time to settle in. So I wouldn't be unduly worried about that.
It doesn't matter. That's the luxury of the quality of the squad they have at the moment. That's
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can think that's a terrible thing because they don't need a £100 million signing to come in and make the difference. Like Chelsea needed Lukaku to come in and make the difference to win the Premier League, or that's at least how it was painted, and it hasn't happened, so they haven't won the league. Whereas City can make a £100 million signing, and whether you think it's a terrible thing for football or whether you just say, well, that's how good their squad is, fair play to them, that's the fact. They don't need somebody to come in and make that massive difference, which is unusual, and it's not something we've had to get our heads around, really. But there we are.
Are they going to go through?
I think so. I think they're the better team. Madrid haven't played particularly well. They didn't play particularly well against PSG. They didn't play particularly well against Chelsea, obviously in that second game, the only thing you worry about is they're a team that they won't die. City could be. City miss chances as well, and if they miss their chances and Madrid don't die, then you've got a recipe for disaster there. But I think if you're asking me who's the better team and who'll have most of it, I would have to go with City. Yeah.
All right, Sam, good stuff. Enjoy the games. Thanks a million.
Thanks very much, guys. Always a pleasure.